Well, welcome to the Invest in ME conference. It's nice to have you here, and we're looking very much forward to what you're going to be saying and sharing with us tomorrow. It's just a chance to let you say something about yourselves and about what you're going to do and your interests in this field of ME, which is of great concern to so many people in this country and much misrepresented. So if we could start with you, Len. This is Dr. Jason, Dr. Leonard Jason, who is an interest in the definition of ME and looking at subgrouping to characterise the illness more specifically to provide. Why do you want to do that? Tell us why you want to do that. Why it's important to make subgroups.
Well, I think it's first important to define what the entity is,
right.
So that you can have people who have the illness versus those who don't.
Right.
Once you're successful in doing that, which is really somewhat of a complicated endeavor, at least it has been in terms of what's been published, what's really critical is that just like with cancer, there's many different types of cancer. With heart disease, there's many different types of heart disease. And if you thought that you could understand cancer by understanding one of those types or treating it by just treating one of those types, you wouldn't be doing what's in the best interest of patients.
Right.
So ultimately, this type of complex illness is going to end up with many different subtypes. And the closer we are able to understand those and really begin investigating those, the better we'll ultimately be able to develop procedures that are going to be effective in helping patients.
So would it be fair to say that your challenge to the medical fraternity and the people involved in dealing with this illness must recognise it's a complex illness with many aspects to it?
It's a very complex illness,
yeah.
And I think we need to, again, understand the sensitivity and the specificity issue first.
Right.
And unfortunately, that issue hasn't always been addressed.
Right. Thank you very much. I understand you're going to say something about paediatric definition.
Yes, I am. And what I'm going to do is really show a model of kind of how one can take a scientific approach and develop a case definition as opposed to a non-empirical approach.
Right. Because there's a great concern in the UK about children with ME, and they are being, we feel, very badly treated by the establishment, and their schooling and their development and growth as into adulthood is being very seriously compromised by the attitudes towards them.
Well, the main problem one of the main problems is that we've had an adult case definition that's been imposed on children when children don't have the same symptoms as adults in this area. Right. So that's one primary issue. And of course the other issue is that, as with the adult case definition, you can have some of the really primary characteristics of this illness, such as post-exertional malaise, cognitive problems, unrefreshing sleep. You can not have those three symptoms, and you can still be classified as having this illness, if you can believe it,
right.
according to the current international Fukuda case definition.
Right, right. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I know please feel free to chip in on this one, because I know that you're interested in children, are you, Martin, as well? You've got a concern for children with ME?
I have a major concern, and I've had the opportunity to treat a number of children, and they certainly are devastated and incapacitated and need to be looked at in the same way that Leonard is looked at, so helpful to all of us, adults. So I certainly have an interest. And of course, pediatrics and its specialty grows from the specialty of adult medicine, internal medicine. I'm an internist, and as a matter of fact, my specialty is infectious diseases.
Right.
And when I started a few days ago, there was no pediatric infectious diseases. And when I started, I was head of infectious diseases at Wayne State in Detroit. There was no pediatric infectious disease doctor, and for 7 years I was the pediatric infectious disease doctor. So that I agree completely with what Leonard says, and children need to be included, and I believe have some evidence to show that the mechanism of disease in children is the same mechanism as in adults.
Right. Well, that's very helpful and encouraging. Judy, you are the chief scientist at the Whitmore Peterson Institute, which is a very exciting development from this side of the water, and we're greatly envious that you've got this off the ground. How will children figure in that institute? Are they going to be part of the patient base that will come in just as they come in sort of randomly, or will there be any special facility?
Well, we've absolutely considered children from the beginning.
Right.
The facility will essentially see anyone who comes in with symptoms, but we've recently interacted with it's called the Mind Institute at UC Davis, and it's a medical institute for neurodevelopmental diseases, investigation of neurodevelopmental diseases. Mm-hmm. And we found in talking with them about their basic research program that they did a profiling of the genetic signature of that disease and found it had one of the basic defects that is central to MECFS, and that is a severely depressed natural killer cell or NK cell function. So a main part of the innate immune response to pathogen in these children is their genetic signature, and it can be subgroup again to kids that'll even respond. And they've had a number of kids that were in this subgroup actually respond to antibiotics and antivirals with speaking full sentences. So in this autistic cohort, you might think of some subgroups of autism, which is also a spectrum disorder, of being an immunological and infectious disease base, similar to the kinds of inflammatory disorders we're seeing in the adults. So I think that we probably, since they're located only 100 or so miles from us, we'll work together. We've talked about becoming sister institutes because they have a large clinical base and the UC Davis system backing them up. So there's our real platform is not to reinvent the wheel and build a lot of central institutes doing their own things, but we've also developed a sister institute with the La Jolla Institute for Immunology and Allergy, because there are overlap in these spectrums of diseases, and they have a world-class molecular disease and immunology department. So we want to work with them. Why? So our resources are better spent if we can focus efforts where the expertise is. So that's the way the Institute's been built. So yes, I do believe we'll initially see children, but again, we won't have the resources, and where resources exist, we'll identify those and take full advantage of those.
Great. Well, that's very exciting, and if we can use that as a model over here, I think a lot of people will be very happy. Now then, Dr. Irving Spurr. This is our resident UK clinician. Irving, you have a long experience with ME patients and must have had a lot of children in your hands with ME and seen them grow through the process of growing up with ME, as well as meeting them and being able to help them in some way. How do you find the number of children in the practice?
Well, that's right. I mean, a quarter of the total number of patients are between the ages of 10 and 15, puberty.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I have noticed is that because of the turbulence in the immune system at puberty, these children are more likely to get sequelae from a persistent viral infection. So you get insulin-dependent diabetes, primary thyroid failure mainly in this group of children.
So there's real loss, yes.
Yeah, and the same as at the menopause,
yeah,
where there's immune turbulence again.
Yes.
Immune diseases rear their heads again.
Right.
Except it's more likely to be connective tissue disorders,
right,
such as lupus.
Right.
You get pernicious anemia,
right,
and again you get primary thyroid failure.
So this is all very, very exciting stuff. I heard the word inflammation coming out from Judy there. Just a quick, brief hands up. Who feels that the what we're calling ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, is an inflammatory disease and could not be adequately named without recognising that fact? Do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, that's great. 4 in 4, that's great. I think that's an important message to be heard over here, because people are trying to make this illness into anything but what we're hearing from you people. An inflammatory condition, which is virally provoked very often. Do you feel that viruses are a major component? Just let's go around then. Do you feel is a virus provoke diseases or illness, or is this other factors as well?
I think kind of viruses certainly are a major kind of contributing factor. But can I just add one other quick thing?
Please.
And that is, what we call an illness has incredible consequences for how people feel about those patients.
Right.
And just think about it. If you were to call somebody as having chronic cough syndrome, and then you basically kind of had people react to them, they would probably sort of be trivialized. But if you had that person said that they had bronchitis or emphysema,
yes,
or something that sounded more medical,
yes,
you would immediately have people become more compassionate and sympathetic. And I just want to kind of emphasize that not only how we define something with the subtypes is critically important for the science in this area, but for patients and how they are interacted with by the healthcare system, friends and family, and work associates, what we call the illness is absolutely critical.
Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful, because there are certain clinicians in this country who have been advised that this is a non-illness, that it doesn't exist, when patients and carers are wrestling with often devastating conditions and situations with no support. The support is withdrawn or minimised, certainly, in the light of the fact that the illness is described as a non-illness. You don't have chronic fatigue syndrome, you don't have, but we call this an inflammatory disease. And I think if we could get some kind of agreement on the name, let's call it myalgic encephalomyelitis, give it a name that has meaning in pathology, and also it tells you where the problems are, the brain, the spinal cord and the muscles. That's at least a start. And viruses are known to do this. But do you feel, are you happy with viruses, Martin? Oh, I think you must be, because you're going to talk to us about this, but just for the record, as it were.
Well, in the patients that we will present tomorrow, a group of almost 200,
right,
falling into two groups, a group A that we call group A and a group B. The group A is made by the three viruses together in single or multiple infections, and they need to be recognized and treated according to the specific virus involved. They're all herpes viruses. The group B contains exactly the same virus, Anlaga, with co-infections, and the co-infections need to be recognized and treated as well, and they make up a third to a quarter of all patients. So that exactly as Leonard Smoke, unless you know exactly what you're dealing with, you will be describing the inflammatory disease, which is an ongoing, inflammatory, persistent, progressive disease. So I agree with this completely. And I could say just another word about the psychological components. Everyone who's ill is depressed. Every one of them. And many, particularly the adults, are angry as well. And this certainly has to be looked at. But this is not the primary cause of disease.
So you mentioned their treatments. Do you feel there are effective treatments that are available that could be used to treat patients effectively?
I absolutely know that there are effective,
right,
specific treatments, and they will be presented tomorrow with some very strong epidemiologic evidence as well.
Right. Well, we look forward to that very much. How do you see the question of treatments? Irving, you've treated people with ME for a long time. What have you found helpful and useful?
Well, it would be nice if we did have an antiviral agent,
Right.
but we haven't. And society is such that we wouldn't be able to give it, if we did have, quickly enough in the disease process, because this illness has got an acute phase as well as a chronic phase.
Right.
And I don't want to preempt my talk tomorrow,
Right.
which is half of which is treatment.
Right.
There's not. I would like to see this disease clearly defined. Living in the country, it's a simple life, and I'd rather keep this disease as simple as possible. It's been mentioned in the literature already with the polio enteroviruses. It would be much easier to restrict it simply to enteroviral ME, and then we're more likely to get A, vaccination, and B, specific antivirals for the RNA viruses. It's much better keeping things clearly defined and simple and not muddy the water because we're doing patients an injustice by doing so. And I'll talk about treatment tomorrow.
Right, okay, that's fine. Judy, you're looking at the molecular basis of the illness, as I understand it.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to help?
Well, it's not really appreciated. We were talking a minute ago about the hormonal effects and things that when in puberty and times of hormonal changes, and we're just now starting to understand the neuroendocrine crosstalk with the immune response.
Right.
And so we know that there are receptors on neurons alone independent of on immune cells, as T cells, B cells that come in response to inflammation, say in the brain. So those cytokine receptors and chemokine receptors are really the integrators of other things that are distinct from immunology, and that if we can understand the crosstalk between the glucocorticoids, the estrogens, the testosterones, and the triggers of the viruses at a molecular level, and we can sort out the cells and understand these crosstalks, we're likely to have interventions, at the time to really reset the homeostasis of the immune response, distinct from those effects that may be more neural than and not necessarily mediated by a cytokine storm or such. So understanding at the molecular level the persistent pathogens that are in a particular subgroup. We might have a herpetic ME and other things, but other things like environmental triggers that can actually change the expression of genes. A lot of my background's in development of epigenetic drugs to target changes that occur from the environment that silence gene expression that you need, say in cancers where my background is, but the epigenetic changes that occur, these triggers could be a virus, they could be a heavy metal, as we see a lot in Nevada. The trigger, the founder of our institute, the Whittemores, their child got sick at 12, perfectly normal child sick at 12. That young woman is now 30, and the only person that would treat her was Dan Peterson, an internist as well, who was local. But some trigger happened, whether it be a pathogen or an environmental stimulus at a particularly vulnerable time in the development on a susceptible genetic host. So we have to understand at the molecular level all the way from the gene expression changes and integrate those data with the particular persistent pathogens, because most of us deal with those pathogens every day fine, and we are fine. And so what is it that makes a host susceptible? And those are these studies that we're collaborating with Jonathan Kerr on. So he's done the gene expression, he's looking at the host, we're looking at the proteomic profiling in the serum, in the cerebrospinal fluid, and then we're looking at the co-infecting pathogens as well.
Well, it's good you mentioned Jonathan Kerr, because he will be here tomorrow talking, and he's one of the premier people in the UK that we look to for leading the evidence that's going to convince the medical establishment that this is an illness that needs to be looked at with some degree of seriousness and with some substantial funding to support it, which was what was asked for in the Gibson report. We asked for equal funding with the current psychiatric treatments that are being offered, which you were indicating, Martin, were very secondary, which we know from the statements by the people who are advocating them, that these are not remotely curative. So if they're not remotely curative, the question many people are asking is, why am I spending all this money on them and not finding out more about it? Very good. Well, thank you very much, all of you. That's good to hear you. Is there any last-minute message you have for us? Because I think the people in the UK want to know what you guys feel and think is important. So, one sentence to crystallise your approach to this illness, your concerns about it.
Sure, I don't think I could ever, as an academic, say something in a sentence. You probably recognize that. But I do think that patients who are as ill as those who have this illness need the best that medicine can offer, and that means multiple disciplines who all come together. If a person had cancer, if a person had AIDS, if a person had one of a number of devastating illnesses, you want a team working with you that is basically going to be looking at all the different dimensions of this illness to basically help you get over it, help you cope with it, help you deal with it. So I just want to kind of emphasize that we need the basic research. We also need to care for the people who have this illness, and we've got to use the best of what we know.
Right. Thank you very much. The best. Very good. Thank you very much. Martin, what?
Well, I'm actually thrilled and grateful to be here, and I thank you for the invitation. I also would like to congratulate you on your courage in looking for a primary, simple cause of this devastating progressive illness. And I'm reminded in medicine of our history of similar causes, which may be a similar moment. I remember searching for the genetic code, and it was quite simple, and it opened a landslide.
Yeah.
I remember searching for the cause of ulcerative disease in humans, and there was a simple bacterial answer. I think all of us here at the table know that there is a simple, scientific, easy, approachable answer to this illness that we call ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, and I congratulate you all for standing up and searching for it.
Thank you very much. Judy, have you got words of hope and wisdom for us?
Well, I agree with what both gentlemen say in that we need that multidiscipline approach. We've done it in every other field of medicine, and that's what we've brought to the Institute. It's translational. We don't do traditional, what they call translational medicine, where we start at the bench and end up at the bedside and go back to the bench. We start at the bedside and we go back to the bench, and then we come back to the patient. So I think with subgrouping, because there are going to be subtle differences, just like Leonard said with cancer, there are 100 different kinds of lymphoma. So what is the problem in the spectrum disorder, and how can we give these people accurate diagnosis? And I believe we can with the new technologies that allow us to sequence the genome and do multiplex analysis in a single sample. And we'll show some of those data tomorrow, which I think will encourage everyone that we are on the cusp and we have therapies out there that we can use and apply once we understand the molecular mechanisms of the pathogenesis.
Thank you very much. Irving, one word of wisdom? Or
well, just simply that ME is a multi-organ illness and ought to be treated by a good general physician.
Yes.
It's as simple as that.
And is there hope for a cure or several effective different cures, do you think?
Absolutely.
Do you have hope for the future?
If I didn't have it, I wouldn't be here.
In dealing with these patients and giving them some hope?
Of course.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming, especially from the States. It's great to have you here, and we do appreciate very much from this side the enormous contribution you're making at the highest level of academia and of medical science, which is in fact going to be able to give people in this country a proper understanding of this very complex illness. But if we have to keep it as simple as we can begin to see our way out of this and help patients who are sick and help to make some of them better, which is the goal of all of us. Thanks very much indeed.